In the last quarter of 1944, World War II reached its climax with the Allied offensive pressing the Germans from east and west in Europe, and with the Americans preparing the invasion of the Philippines, which led to the colossal naval battle of Leyte Gulf. But far from all those hellish battlefronts, in the quite American countryside town of Cape Girardeau, on the banks of the Mississippi River in the far southeast of the state of Missouri, a little boy called Dale Adam Dye was born, the son of Dale Adam and Della Grace Dye. His father was a liquor merchant who traveled throughout the region, particularly to the city of St. Louis. And when young Dale was old enough to accompany him, he began taking his son along on his work journeys, which sometimes led father and son to taverns and working-class bars. While his father worked, young Dale found himself mesmerized listening to the bar patrons recount their personal stories, many of them World War II combat veterans. One story, however, stuck with him like no other. A former Marine had told him in vivid detail of a fierce hand-to-hand combat he'd had with Japanese soldiers on a distant Pacific island. And a strange name was etched into his mind that day, Iwo Jima. As he walked home with his father, the boy couldn't think of anything else, and that night he looked up information about the Battle of Iwo Jima in a book. With each line he read, a thought became more concrete in his young mind. He would join the United States Marine Corps. Upon completing elementary school, he entered the Missouri Military Academy, a preparatory school for the admission exams to the U.S. military academies. Dye had hoped to enter the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, but after 3 unsuccessful attempts, he saw his family's limited education budget come to an end and decided in January 1964, at the age of 19, to enlist as a soldier in the Marine Corps. When Dye was dispatched to boot camp, he didn't yet know it, but his country would soon be plunged into a bloody and seemingly endless conflict on the other side of the planet. The former French colony of Vietnam had been fighting an uninterrupted war since its early years of independence, initially driving French troops out of its territory and subsequently living in a state of constant violence since its land was divided into 2 antagonistic republics, the Communist North and the Capitalist South. In the South, a communist guerrilla movement was rapidly gaining gigantic proportions, the Viet Cong, which undermined Saigon's authority through multiple armed actions throughout the country. American support for the South Vietnamese government saw the deployment of numerous U.S. Navy units to the Vietnamese coast, and on August 2, 1964, a naval skirmish with Hanoi forces, known as the Gulf of Tonkin Incident, gave President Lyndon Johnson the authority to send American troops to the Asian country. Meanwhile, Private Dale Dye completed his basic training and was assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 3rd Marine Regiment, and with that unit was transferred to Camp Schwab on the Japanese island of Okinawa. On March 8, 1965, a contingent of 3,500 Marines landed on the sands near Da Nang in northern South Vietnam, where the Americans would establish a vast military base of operations. A few weeks later, in early April, the 2nd Battalion arrived in Da Nang, and Dale Dye set foot for the first time on the battlefield that would change his life. A few days after his arrival, however, battalion officers approached him, having observed him throughout the training and deployment period, and noticed some distinct characteristics in his behavior. Private Dye displayed a good measure of analytical and observational ability, and quite unlike his colleagues, demonstrated an unmistakable interest in literature, being constantly caught reading books in his free time. The officers then encouraged Dye to become a war correspondent, a rare role within the Marine Corps. His job would focus on observing war actions and writing reports for military publications and newspapers in the United States. It would be up to him to tell the story of his Marine battalion in the Vietnam War. Contrary to what one might think, this arrangement did not make Dale Dye's service any easier. As a correspondent, he was always accompanying units on the front lines, constantly exposing himself to enemy fire, experiencing more battles than the average of his infantry colleagues. During this period, Dye developed immense respect for the soldiers known in the Marine Corps as grunts, the soldiers who handled fire in combat situations. The Marines' motto is to be the most fearless and tough-as-nails troop in the American Armed Forces, and in Dale Dye's chronicles, they were portrayed as unwavering war machines capable of overcoming any adversary. He finished his first year-long combat tour in April 1966 and was sent home, but returned to Vietnam the following year, arriving back in the country in early 1967. After spending many months in the intense but familiar routine of accompanying Marine operations against the enemy, in late January 1968, near the end of his second tour, he would have a very unpleasant surprise. On January 30th, 1968, the North Vietnamese People's Army and the Viet Cong launched a daring joint offensive, surprising the Americans inside the major cities they garrisoned in the south, as well as in the inner reaches of the country. The Tet Offensive, as it became known because it was launched on the date of the important national holiday, demonstrated to the world the impressive organizational skills of the Vietnamese communists, who until then were thought to be being driven out by the Americans. Amid the chaos of the battle for control of the city of Hue, journalist Michael Herr, future co-writer of the screenplay for the classic war film Full Metal Jacket, watched Dale Dye in awe as he followed the combat. And there was a Marine correspondent, Sergeant Dale Dye, who sat with a tall yellow flower sticking out of his helmet cover, a really outstanding target. He was rolling his eyes around and saying, oh yes, Charlie's got his shit together here, this will be bad," and smiling happily. It was the same smile I saw a week later when a sniper's bullet tore up a wall 2 inches above his head. Odd cause for amusement in anyone but a grunt. Dye was wounded in the early days of the offensive, awarded the Purple Heart, and sent to a hospital in the rear. Meanwhile, in early March, he discovered that the Marines were preparing an offensive to intercept the retreating North Vietnamese forces from the city of Hue after intense fighting. And while even still recovering, he requested his battalion commander to join the troops as a war correspondent. This way, Dye took part in Operation Ford, which took place between March 14th and 20th, 1968, and resulted in fierce fighting on the border between the two countries. On the night of March 18th, amidst intense crossfire, Dye saw the loader of a machine gun at the front of the American position being killed by the enemy. So Dye took the position and kept feeding the weapon. When the ammunition ran out, even with his wounds still not fully healed, he ran to the rear, exposing himself to the Vietnamese fire that practically surrounded him, and brought with him another load of projectiles to feed the machine gun and keep the enemies at bay. On other occasions, he also left his primary duty and risked his life to rescue other wounded Marines and a Navy corpsman, actions that earned him the Bronze Star with the V device, which denotes the combat merit of the award. Sergeant Dye would go on to complete a third combat tour in Vietnam between 1969 and 1970, taking part in no fewer than 31 combat operations in total. Although he always accompanied the Marines as a correspondent, he stood out for truly admiring the men who were leading the combat, and never stopped wanting to be one of them, always carrying a feeling of personal debt to the grunts. Already holding the rank of Master Sergeant, in 1976, Dale Dye was made a warrant officer due to his outstanding talent and authority in his field, a specialization he consolidated by obtaining his academic degree in English literature from the University of Maryland. A few years later, his excellence in service was once again recognized, with his nomination for the LDO program, or Limited Duty Officer, which recognizes and commissions officers with extremely unique technical specializations unsuitable for career officers. Thus, Dye became a second lieutenant, rapidly advancing to first lieutenant and captain in 1982, when he was sent to Beirut, Lebanon, to serve in the multinational task force that was deployed to the country after the ceasefire between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization in the Lebanese Civil War. After a year of service, he returned to the United States in September 1983, shortly before Islamic Jihad detonated 2 trucks filled with bombs at the Marines' headquarters in Beirut, killing 241 of them and 58 other French soldiers. The following year, 1984, Dye went to the reserves after exactly 2 decades of service in the Marines, already a celebrated Mustang, a term used to designate military personnel who join as recruits and become officers in the armed forces. While in the reserves, Dye became a correspondent for the Soldier of Fortune magazine, and during this period, while reporting on armed conflicts in Central America, he served as a jungle warfare instructor for troops in El Salvador and Nicaragua, who were fighting communist guerrillas in their territory. And from this unusual experience, $1 million idea was born in his mind. Besides being an avid reader, Dye was also passionate about movies, having watched basically every war film he was introduced to. However, one thing always bothered him. The soldiers portrayed on screen didn't act like soldiers, but rather like poor allegories of the real soldier, acting and speaking in a completely unrealistic way. Dye then opened a company called Warriors, Inc., with the idea of transforming actors into soldiers to forever change the face of war cinema. Moving to Los Angeles in 1985, he went around the studios trying to sell his idea to new productions in progress, and all of them, without exception, rejected the proposal. It was then that he read in a newspaper that a new director named Oliver Stone was producing a new war film about Vietnam, but with a curious twist. The movie was to be based on his own experiences in the conflict. Dye then realized that Stone might be just the man who would understand his idea. Almost penniless, but extremely determined, he scoured Hollywood's backstage to contact the director until he got his phone number. Dale Dye then secured a meeting, and after explaining his idea for 60 seconds, Stone interrupted him and said, "I get it. I want this. Do whatever it takes." Embarking for the Philippines, where the film Platoon was to be shot, Dale Dye then spent 3 weeks with the entire cast at his disposal, subjecting Charlie Sheen, Johnny Depp, Forrest Whitaker, Willem Dafoe, Tom Berenger, and others to intense military training. According to him, a condensed version of the basic training we received in the Marine Corps. After a few days, the actors were already acting entirely like soldiers, accustomed to carrying heavy equipment, and perfectly able to portray the sensations and emotions that the script demanded. Dye even separated the actors into 2 groups to accentuate the rivalry between the units commanded by Berenger's and Dafoe's characters. And in addition, Oliver Stone even put him in front of the cameras, in the role of Captain Harris, the company commander, also starting his unexpected acting career. The result was spectacular. With a budget of $6 million, Platoon grossed $138 million at the box office in 1986, becoming the film that made Vietnam War veterans feel truly represented for the first time. The film also won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Oliver Stone, who during the ceremony pointed to Dale Dye, saying, "This guy is responsible for all of this." That would be the beginning of a vast and prolific career that would transform Captain Dale Dye into the most renowned military figure in Hollywood, and his company would act as a consultant and casting director on several major productions such as Casualties of War, Born on the 4th of July, The Last of the Mohicans, Forrest Gump, Starship Troopers, and The Thin Red Line. However, his success reached astronomical levels with Saving Private Ryan, a co-production between Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks that is credited with reinventing war cinema in 1998, bringing viewers a whole new layer of realism and rawness previously unknown on the big screen. This success convinced HBO to finance another of Hanks's ideas, to film a miniseries adaptation of Stephen Ambrose's book, Band of Brothers, the saga of Easy Company, of the 506 Regiment, of the 101 Airborne Division in World War II, which premiered on screens in 2001. In the resounding success that was Band of Brothers, Dale Dye not only meticulously prepared the cast physically, but also embodied the character of Colonel Robert Sink, commander of the 506th Regiment, to this day his most celebrated role on screen. In 2017, Dale Dye was made an honorary member of the 506th Regiment, due to the brilliance of his work in portraying the unit's former commander. His company continued the Spielberg-Hanks partnership with the productions The Pacific of 2010 and Masters of the Air of 2024, and also expanded into the video game market, narrating the first Medal of Honor game in 1999. In later titles in the series, Dye not only lent his voice and provided consulting services to the production, but his likeness was also used for characters in the plot. In 2024, Captain Dale Dye marked his 80th birthday as a celebrated combat veteran and Hollywood's most prominent military consultant, having been primarily responsible for renewing the realism of one of the most valuable industries on the planet.